Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I am the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. We're in the middle of a study on Matthew chapter 24, and we're looking at the Great Tribulation. Now, we already demonstrated that the Great Tribulation was fulfilled in the first century, and by comparing Luke 21 with Matthew chapter 24, we showed you that the Great Tribulation was in fact the days of vengeance upon Old Covenant Israel in the first century. Now, we also showed you that the days of vengeance was the covenantal judgment and wrath of Jehovah upon Old Covenant Israel for their violation of the Old Covenant. And what I want to do in this video is I just want to give you a little bit more, some more thoughts regarding the Great Tribulation being a covenantal judgment of God upon Old Covenant Israel in the first century. Now, to do that, I want to take you to the book of Hosea first, and then we're going to go backwards to Luke 23 and Luke 21 and tie it back into the Great Tribulation. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 1. Watch this. Put the trumpet to your lips. Like an eagle, the enemy comes against the house of the Lord because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. Now, Hosea was a prophet to the northern kingdom, okay? The 10 northern tribes of Israel, and he prophesied their imminent destruction and judgment at the hands of the Assyrian Empire, okay, the king of Syria. Now, but here's the thing. This judgment that will come upon Israel in 722 BC was the judgment of God for transgressing the covenant and rebelling against his law. In other words, it was a covenantal judgment. Now watch this. This, in the same context, watch what Hosea says regarding this judgment. Go with me to Hosea chapter 10 and verse 8. Watch this. Let's go to 7 and 8. Samaria will be cut off with your king like a stick on the surface of the water. Also, the high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, will be destroyed. Thorn and thistle will grow on their altars. Then they will say to the mountains. So this is what Israel would say at the time of judgment, the judgment of the Lord by the Assyrian army for transgressing the covenant. This is what Israel would say: cover us. And they say to the mountains, fall on us. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to connect that to Luke 21 and the days of vengeance, which is the Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24. So once again, Hosea prophesied a time in the judgment of the Lord, a covenantal judgment upon Israel for their violation of the old covenant. And at that time, they would say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Go with me to Luke chapter 23. Jesus, on his way to his crucifixion, was carrying his cross, and listen to this. Some women were weeping over him for they obviously foresaw the suffering and the crucifixion that lay beyond him. And listen to what he says to them in verse 28. Jesus turning to them and said, daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. A direct quotation from Hosea 10 verse 8. What does that mean? That means that Jesus was telling the women of Jerusalem who are weeping over him that they would see in their days a judgment that will come upon them and their children. And in those days, they would say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. In other words, the judgment that will come upon them, the women and their children, would be the same judgment that Hosea spoke of. Okay, it was a covenantal judgment of Jehovah upon Israel for their violation of the covenant. Now, obviously, they're different judgments. Hosea's judgment took place in 722 BC when Assyria destroyed Israel as a covenantal judgment. But by Jesus quoting that text, the mountains fall on us, to the hills cover us, he's telling his generation that the judgment that would come upon them would also be a covenantal judgment for their violation of the Mosaic covenant, a covenantal wrath and vengeance. Now here's how I want to connect this to the Great Tribulation. This text in Luke 23, this judgment that will come upon those women and their children, was the days of vengeance of Luke 21. Okay? Scholars are virtually agreed upon this. Jesus was referring to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 when they would say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. Go with me to Luke chapter 21. And I want to show you this. Remember now, before we go there, look at the language in Luke 23. Okay? In Luke 23 verse 29, watch this. Jesus says to the women who are weeping, for behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bear, and the breasts that never gave suck. So in other words, he's saying, look, blessed are you, those who don't have children, blessed are you, because they're not going to go through this tribulation, this vengeance. Luke 21 now, watch this. Look at Jesus' language in Luke 21 and verse 23. And then this is the context in verse 20 where it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation is near. And then watch this, watch the language. It's the same as Luke 23:29. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath to this people. You see, by Jesus saying, woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies, that's the same as him saying, blessed are those who never bear, and to those who don't give suck. It's the same context. The judgment of Luke 23 is the days of vengeance of Luke 21 that will come upon his generation, that will come upon those women who were weeping for him and their children. Okay? But we already showed you that the days of vengeance of Luke 21 is the Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24. So let me tie this together, okay? The Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24 is the days of vengeance of Luke 21. But the days of vengeance of Luke 21 was the judgment of Luke 23, when they would say to the hills, to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. A direct quotation from Hosea 10 verse 8. But Hosea 10:8 was a covenantal judgment of Jehovah upon Israel for their violation of the Mosaic covenant. Therefore, the Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24, which is the days of vengeance of Luke 21 and 23, was a covenantal judgment of Jehovah upon Old Covenant Israel for their violation of the Mosaic covenant. It was a covenantal judgment of the first century that came upon Old Covenant Israel for their violation of the Mosaic covenant. And this is perfectly parallel with with Matthew chapter 23, 29 and following, when Jesus pronounces the 7 woes upon that generation and says that they would be judged, they would be held guilty for all of the righteous blood that was shed upon the earth. See, that is a judgment. That is a covenantal judgment in and of itself as well. Shedding innocent blood under the old covenant meant death. It meant separation and judgment and wrath. That's what Matthew chapter 24 is all about, and that's what the Great Tribulation is all about. Was all about, I should say. It was the covenantal judgment and wrath upon Old Covenant Israel for their violation of Mosaic covenant in fulfillment of the days of vengeance, when all things written were fulfilled. Specifically, all things written concerning the judgment, the final, consummative, eschatological judgment of Old Covenant Israel in their last days. Well, that's it for today. We'll pick it up next time on Answers on Eschatology. Got lots more then. Bye for now.